Hello, and welcome back to another fun-filled episode of the Hammercast. I'm your host, Alex, the Hebrew Hammer Salkin, and joining me today is Michael Kurkowski, a guy I've known for a very long time, oddly enough. Like, there are a lot of people in the fitness industry who come and go. Nothing wrong with that, but it's always nice to see somebody who's stuck around for a while. And I remember we've only actually met in person once. We'll talk about that in a little bit. We'll reminisce for the listening audience. But we're going to talk a bit about, of course, the kettlebell, fitness industry, and a whole lot of other great stuff. Michael is an expert, if ever there was one, in all of these different things. So it's going to be a very good conversation. Before we begin, I want to make sure that I mention, as always, that if you haven't already, you should get my 9-minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge. It is, as the name implies, only 9 minutes long. And it is an excellent complement to any other program that you are currently doing because it focuses primarily on very non-technical, but very effective gait pattern movements to help improve your strength with various kettlebell and calisthenics exercises. Go to 9minutechallenge.com if you would like to get your mitts on it digitally. It's a digitally delivered thing, and it will be yours. So without further ado, Michael, thank you for joining me.
Brother, thanks so much for having me. Anytime I get to chat with you, I know it's going to be a good day. So
yeah, absolutely. You know, it's we have to go over we have to reminisce a little bit about how we first met because it's very funny. And there are some elements I don't know if you remember now. We'll cover it, but we met in Reno, Nevada, 2012. It's coming up on 10 years ago, in fact.
Wow, 10 years, yeah.
I know. Easy Strength.
The Easy Strength Summit. Oh, still one of my favorite certification. Well, it wasn't even a certification. It was a workshop.
Yeah.
Unbelievable work. Dan, John, and Pavel for 2 days in a row with a group of like 25 people. It was amazing.
Yeah, it was really cool too. As I remember, we got plenty of like, I don't want to say exercise breaks because they weren't, like, okay, go, move around a bit. It was like, some actual focused, what do you call it? Like they were teaching us some stuff. I mean, it wasn't just kettlebell stuff. Like we were going over. I remember Dan taught us like the Olympic
lifts. Yeah. No, I was cracking up on that. Remember, because it was a bunch of RKCs at the time, bunch of kettlebell instructors. So everybody's good athlete and movement. And you saw some people, myself at the helm, have no idea how to do an Olympic lift at all, looking like absolute goofballs for like the first like half of the day in there. But then it was just learning Olympic lifts from Dan John, like right off the bat. It's like seriously, you're learning basketball from Michael Jordan. So
yeah, it was amazing. And Dan has a really good approach to teaching because he really is able to simplify things down, make them very, very easy. And we had a great time. But I was going to say one thing that I remember very distinct that was very funny is that I think for whatever reason, I think I needed money for a shuttle and you loaned me like $10.
This is so funny that you remember this because I remember this too.
And I remember I was like, and we didn't know each other. It was just like, you did me a solid. You were like, all right, yeah, here you go. And I was like, and so I remember I was like, let me get your address, guy. We'll pay you back. I promise. And I actually sent you like a $10 bill and mailed it to you.
Dude, I got to tell you, I'm like, yeah, we were like going back to the shuttle. Everybody was going to the airport after the weekend. It was great. We had like, a bunch of people in there. And yeah, I think like you didn't have any cash. I was like, yeah, no worries, dude. I got you. And you're like, well, give me your address to get that. And I'm like, okay. So I gave you my address on it. And sure enough, like a few days later, there's a $10 bill and a card from this. I was like, man, this guy is freaking true to his word. Like I've never had that happen before. So that was, I'll never forget that story till the day I die.
Yeah, it's very funny because I did, I was very grateful because it's like, there was no Uber at the time,
Yes.
It was like, and if you take a taxi, you're going to have to pay them somehow, and so, it was, did me a huge solid. So it's funny that you remember that too, because I forgot about the card. I did remember sending you the tenor. Yeah.
That was such an interesting workshop because those early workshops there were so fascinating. It was funny because I actually ended up on a plane going there with Karen Smith to my right, Betsy Colley like in front of me, and Joe Sansalone on my other side.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, I'm a brand new guy in this world of kettlebell. So these people who are all team leaders and senior instructors in there, I'm all on the same plane, just listening to their conversation for like 2 hours from Minnesota to there. And, sure enough, I just chatted with Karen not too long ago, but that's when she did her Iron Maiden there and like was one of the first Iron Maidens to build up in this. So it was, definitely feel very fortunate to have found this world early to
Yeah.
witness some of these awesome things.
No, that must have been cool, man. Like, especially on a flight, it's like most people are like, oh, read this crappy in-flight magazine or I'll do
Yeah.
whatever. And you got to hear these giants in our industry
Oh, it
having
was amazing.
having a
Yeah.
conversation. Oh, that's very cool. Now you mentioned you were still somewhat new back in 2012. So I'm curious, like, what is your origin story? Like, and in particular, let's like really zoom out too. So like, how did you get into fitness? Were you always like fit or athletic when you were younger? Was it something you discovered, when you got a little bit older? How did that get started?
The origin, my comic book origin story. I love it.
Exactly,
I was
exactly.
born on a overcast day, and no, I'm just playing. No, I was always like most coaches. I loved athletics growing up. Growing up, my father was a huge basketball player, so I grew up playing basketball, baseball. But always, I enjoyed kind of the ins and outs of athletics and sports. So I like kind of the game inside the game. Really great at baseball. That was really my best one. But like most coaches too, I was never the best athlete. I was never the best player. So, in order for me to continuously get to that next level of competition, I had to study more. I had to learn how to train better in different ways. So, training always early on was a fascination to me and I was one of those weird kids that kind of enjoyed practice more than actually playing the game. I think I probably heard something early from Michael Jordan. I was a big Michael Jordan fan growing up before Kobe and all those guys. And I heard he like gave 110% in practice so games would be easy. And that just stuck with me as a
Yeah.
kid. So I just always realized that practice was a place that's where you get better. And then games are just fun and you can just enjoy it from there.
Now, when you were you lifting weights back then too, or was it just like pure basketball and that was it?
No, I never really touched a weight until getting into high school. And, it's funny. I heard there was a story that I wrote about recently, like the first time I went into weight room in high school. And for some reason, I was a freshman who ended up in the seniors like gym class. Like it was the time when it was just matched with my schedule and theirs. And I was kind of a very shy, very introverted kid. So to be a young freshman, brand new in school, and be around a bunch of seniors who were all driving. It was like, yeah, I felt like I was just a complete alien in this world. And walking around, seeing a lot of the athletes and a lot of the football players and stuff, they were lifting weights. They're lifting huge freaking weights. And they gave us the high school 2-minute tutorial of what to do. And I ended up going to a bench kind of where nobody was at all. And because I just knew nobody was there, so I can just lift. I did like some bench with probably like 65 pounds or something like that. But I put all the small weights on the side, and just not knowing what to do as I was taking all the weights off, I took them all off of one side. So, it can completely topple over. So this kid rolled up with me, just this, senior. I knew he was an athlete. He was, good looking guy, just like looked like the all-American high school kid. And he's running over to me to see this. And I think in my head, like, this kid's going to call me an asshole or something like that. Like, what are you
Right.
doing, you little shit? And he just kind of whispered, he's like, hey man, just, you want to make sure you take them off on both sides, for it. He's like, you got this. And then just walked away. And like, just that little bit of encouragement of like somebody who has no idea what they were doing in the gym, that stuck with me of going and even going into training. So, but I had no idea what I was doing back then. And sure enough, when I got into like 19, 20 years old, I wanted to make a run at playing baseball again because that was my big thing. And I was living in Boston. I got my own personal trainer who beat the crap out of me for a couple of years. And I really fell in love with going to the gym because I was seeing the differences in, my strength, my athleticism. I was 20 years old, so my body changed really quick. So now I was getting definition. So I was feeling more confident walking around in my body. And that really kind of got me into it. And then when I moved back to New York, I was just working at a restaurant, just kind of not knowing what I was going to do. And a friend of mine who was at the restaurant was a personal trainer. He just got his personal training, his NASM certification at a gym near me. And I was just kind of looking to get back in shape. I let myself go a little bit and I jumped in with him. And I thought it was going to be similar to what I did before, where my old trainer was just an athletic trainer. Like we were just, supersets of everything. He came in and he did a functional movement screen on me. Okay. Now backing up a little bit, when I was 14, my femur slipped out of the growth plate and I had to have a pin put in it.
Mm.
So that actually took me out of sports for like 2 years because I was recovering, and they really wanted me off my feet for a long time because it's not an easy thing just to set in there. So that kind of threw me away from a lot of the athletics early on. So when he did a movement screen on me, I was so off balance, so out of whack in my squat patterns and my single leg patterns, not even realizing it. Because when you're 20, 21 years old, you don't feel pain. You just go through it and you just wake up the next day and you feel great. So he got me into more of the functional side of training and strength. And I trained with him for like a year, realizing like I didn't even know what feeling good felt like. He actually got me in balance. He taught me into more the quote unquote functional strength world of getting in. And then he ended up being the manager of that company and said, "Hey, did you ever think about getting into personal training?" And I'm like, "Well, tell me about, like, how does it work? Like, do I have to go to school? Do I have to do?" He's like, "Well, why don't you like take a look at this?" And he gave me his NASM books from the National Academy of Sports Medicine. And I studied it. I just worked it. I got my certification. I got a job, and that just kind of spiraled into the next 14, 15 years of my life.
That's pretty incredible. You know, it's funny because I think that a lot of people end up personal trainers who stick with it. I think a lot of times end up in the exact same way. It's not like it was a momentary like fiery passion that made them, you know, want to turn their hobby into a career. It's something where they feel like, you know, I've undergone a transformation, and I was at one point I was not a natural, and now I get it, and I want to help other people to do the
Mhm.
same thing, right?
Yeah.
Now, along the way, and I would imagine because we haven't really talked much about kettlebells yet. Kettlebells came into the picture at some point, but maybe it was early because you got a guy who did a functional movement screen on you, and like the FMS world and kettlebell world were kind of integral. Right around that time, they were really starting to you know, meld very well. Did you have an early introduction to kettlebells, or was it later on, or what was the story?
I did. So we went to a FMS workshop with the team that I was training with in I believe it was New Jersey. It was like a Marriott, New Jersey. And that was back when like Gray and Lee and all they were just building it up. So they were there. So I got to meet Gray Cook and Lee Burton, and he was referencing Pavel and, you know, some of the work with windmills and things like that. And I did some kettlebell work, but more like what you would just see like workout of the day type stuff and using them as weights. And I started to kind of see what was going on with it and started to use them more in my practice, learning how to swing, learning how to snatch, doing Turkish get-ups, those types of things. And then fortunate enough, again, some things just happen out of you know, sheer serendipity, is FMS created a level 2 workshop, and my gym in Clifton Park hosted the first one, I believe, in the United States.
Wow.
And it was my team of like 9 or 10, and there was like 3 other people, taught by Brett Jones. He was the master RKC instructor at that time. So he came in, and I got a chance to pick him up from his hotel and take him to dinner that we were going to that night.
Wow.
Chatted with him one-on-one about the RKC and like that training program, because there was one other guy at that workshop that came in who just got into the RKC, and he wore a shirt and stuff like that. And I think it was like early before the second day came, a bunch of them were there just kind of doing some workouts. Brett was giving some instructions, and I just kind of popped up. I was like, "Hey, can you guys critique my swing?" And
Boy,
within
can they.
within about 7 minutes, they had me doing things like, I mean, first I was kicking my shoes off. Like, I was using a 35-pound kettlebell for 2-hand swings, and they just ripped me apart. So much so that like you have to do that, like hold the chair as you sit down, because my hamstrings were on fire so much
Oh, yeah.
out of that. So they just critiqued the crap out of me with that time. I mean, and not just to beat the crap out of me, but just to, you know, give me the right tools and the tips of what we need. And after that, I was like, all right, I need to learn this world. So I signed up for the RKC that was coming up later, like a few months down, in like April of 2010 in Minnesota, the old Dayton's Bluff Community Center there, and trained for it for a few months, and just really got into it. And I realized as soon as I got in and I finished that first workshop, I knew that this was something that I was going to be a part of. You know, just not just like the tool is great. It's a great versatile tool and stuff like that. But the systems that Pavel has created with Brett and with, you know, with Karen, with Doc Hartowitz, I mean, the master instructors that have been through this time and the evolution of what they've done from the RKC now into Strong First, the systems of it just made so much sense to me. of just the minimalist basis, but really focusing on mastery.
Yeah.
And I was always just one that I wanted to try and master things. Like I didn't like to go into the shallow end of stuff. I like to dive deep into it. And this really gave me the opportunity to do that.
Absolutely. No, and it's interesting you mentioned that too, because it's like, I remember the first time I ever picked up a kettlebell. This year in April, late March, early April, it'll be 14 years ago, which is an insane thing to think about. But a friend of mine, Drew Christensen, called me over. He was obsessed with kettlebells back in the day. And it was like, I had heard of them because there's a vague mention of them in a book called The Art of Expressing the Human Body, which purports to be about Bruce Lee's strength training and bodybuilding routines and stuff like that. And there's like one page that mentions them, but it mentions it as like an add-on that you would take it was like a handle you could buy that the Milo company would sell.
Okay.
And you would attach it to like a dumbbell, and it's like really like primitive stuff. So this was already like kettlebells had kind of gone by the wayside in the American landscape at the time that he was working out, but he had relative familiarity with kind of the concept. So anyway, my friend Drew was really obsessed with it, and I remember the first thing I tried to do when he had me over to do a workout was I tried to curl it. I'll never forget. It was like a 25-pound kettlebell, and I did like a curl with it. And he's like, "No, dude, that's not how you use it." And it is interesting because he was having me do exercises I had never seen. And I think one of the things with the kettlebell is like there are certain exercises you can do that you could do with different implements, but with a kettlebell as a system, like you pointed out, and as particularly a system of principles, not just movements that we do because we do. It really stood out to me because at that point I had gotten into I was doing Muay Thai, and so I was lifting, I was doing some dumbbell stuff, but basic bodybuilding type of stuff. But the kettlebell really stuck with me for that because it seemed like there was like this core group of movements that you do, not because you just like bench, squat, deadlift, like they're just kind of ubiquitous at this point, but because they help to illuminate certain principles, and they're a part of a larger system that will help you to build up to other exercises. And it's like, to me, that made sense. It's like, okay, this is actually something that it's like, if you look at it from like a martial arts standpoint, okay, you got to learn how to punch and kick and these other things. Then after that, you can do all the cool stuff that you see in the movies if you really want to. With the kettlebell, very much the same thing. And I'd never been exposed to that before. And it was like all of a sudden, it was like strength training made sense. It's like, that's exactly why would it be any other way? It almost seemed like any other approach would almost seem like silly. So when you, with that in mind, it sounds like you had a somewhat similar experience because you talked about wanting to master something and wanting it to be like really, something that you could get really, really good at and dive deep into. Was it something then that you were like, okay, I'm going to adopt this specifically, or did you integrate it with your training with yourself and your clients?
It's funny, so I kind of just like on the point that you just put right there, I kind of equated it to when I was, I had my baseball coaches fixing my swing. It's like I was always one that I always loved the criticism, coming forward. Like I'm like, okay, like how do I get better? And with a baseball swing, you can change so many little tiny things, and all of a sudden it just puts you right back in. And then your swing goes out of whack, and then you tweak it, you adjust it again, and then you're right back into it. Golfers can say the same thing. You see, any athlete who does something repetitively, like they get a little bit out of rhythm, they just find that groove again, and then they're right back into it and build. And that was like when Brett and this other guy, I wish I remembered the name of that guy because I credit him a lot into this journey, but just the way that they critiqued me for like those 7 minutes in there, I'm like, okay, I need more of this. Like, I know there's much deeper than this, just swinging a kettlebell behind me and back. But when I got back, what's kind of interesting is when I got back from RKC1, I was like the newly minted coach that came back. Like I was ready to implement everything with my clients. But I was at a place that really didn't, I guess the best way is just didn't really give a shit about it. It's kind of like, it was my experience. I was part of this, but I wasn't at an RKC, like a kettlebell gym. We did functional movement screen, but it was more of like a commercial type gym. Like they were, the model behind them was really more about functional fitness and stuff. But I'm like, okay, I'm just going to take the clients I'm working with and I'm going to introduce them into this system. It's like, because I wanted to come back, I wanted to bring everything in, but with people who have been doing things for a long time, it's like to break through that barrier of that stuff, it like takes a bit. I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to take this. And I've had a few clients that I've worked with even since my inception into this, who have still been with me now to this day,
Yeah.
who are like, thank God you introduced me to this, because it's changed their lives. Just not just from, again, the tool, but just the system of it, of learning, how to do complexes, do it, how to lift heavier weights than you really think. I think it's still something in the fitness business, especially with older adults. People think that we need to treat them with bubble wrap all the time. It's like, no,
Yeah.
like they can lift a heavy bell off the ground, like relative to where they're at. But it like you can lift this bell and actually use the muscles and actually force them to contract and hold that bell and go for a long walk with them, or swing the bell. You don't need to be snatching, it's like right off the bat, but you can swing a freaking bell. I have a client, she's almost 80 years old with me now. And I've had like, she swung 70, 80-pound kettlebells, before, and crushed it out, and she came back, she's like, was that good? It's like, yeah, that was freaking great.
Yeah.
And so it is, it's like, it's something that I used with athletes. I used with rehab clients of coming in. I think that was, why I've worked with Brett Jones for over 7 years now as my personal coach. And he's taught me so much of speaking each language to each person that you have. And I think, the kettlebell has been a tool that I've been able to talk with, young athletes who are just coming up in their sport, or older adults who are just trying to stay in their homes and to still stay, independent from there. So it's really something that you can implement, I think, with any single person. And that's why it's been such a huge thing for me.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right about the using the relatively heavy weights, because I know that the people that I've trained in the past are always surprised. They're like, we're going to start off that heavy, like, because in their mind, they're in the same place that I was, at my friend Drew's driveway, like we're gonna do curls, we're gonna do these other, like that's what they're expecting. So they're not expecting to like lift it off the ground, because like, I think a lot of people don't even see that as being like a movement. They're like, well, what's the big deal? You just pick it up, you know. But when they learn how to, this is where the system and the principles come into play. They learn how to use their entire body as a unit. They learn how to engage movement patterns that make using your body as a unit something that is achievable for anybody. They can start, swinging a 35-pound kettlebell pretty much right out of the gate. In many cases, they can work up to, even if they're 80 years old, they can start swinging the 70 or 80-pound kettlebell. And it's like learning how to use the body the way that it's made to be used allows you to do the things that you were able to do that you never even thought you were able to do. And it sounds like you've got a lot of people who are really excited about the fact that you maybe, had to force it on them for a little while. Like, no, like, let's just try this, just give it a try, whatever. Now, how many of those folks have gone on to become trainers themselves? Like, did anybody go and do that, like, just as kind of like a personal challenge, or do they mostly like they're mostly sticking with just being the end user, for instance?
As far as clients I've worked with?
Yeah, exactly.
Some have gone on to work through and get into training. I've trained SFGs of getting into their level 1s and their level 2s of getting it. It's always fun, to work with people like that, because it's a very simple conversation, to go. It's a very straight line goal that they're looking at. So, my job on that point, and as you know, is to like give the right cues, but not over cue them. And I think, really just working with, I think the big thing, especially just overall in the fitness business, and what the kettlebell systems and RKC and StrongFirst did for me, is it just simplified things down for people. Like, the one thing I realized from work, because my main job for a long time in my first job in fitness was working with new members, of bringing people in. And it was in personal training, it was in kettlebells, it was in athletics. And some people were just coming in to get a gym membership. And you would see the walk up to the front desk from people, how scared shitless they are of going into a gym. And you think it's like, it's just a gym there. Some people are so self-conscious. And if you don't know, if you step into something where you don't know anything and it's a different environment, I don't care who you are, it's a nerve-wracking thing. So I think the first thing that I really learned so much, and what helped me so much, is that I was allowed to speak so simply to anybody, whether they were in a fitness enthusiast, whether a top level athlete, and we can talk about the science and the deep stuff of going in, which is fun. But I could talk to, a grandma and grandpa that are coming in who are, don't want to have to move down south. Like they want to stay in their home. And they,
Mhm.
I have a client that I had early in my career. Her name was Helen, and she was the ripe age of 93 when I first started training her. And we had a system of insurance in the gym that I had, where insurance would pay for the memberships of seniors. So it's
Oh,
called
sure.
Silver Sneakers, which was great. And I got a lot of people who I worked with from it, and they were a blast to work with because they were regimented, they were always on time, they were really, in there. But when I talked to Helen, she wanted to learn kettlebells. And she talked to one of the trainers there, and she's like, well, you got to talk to Mike. Mike's the kettlebell guy. So I talked to her, and she wanted to learn how to use this. And I was like, okay, what's your goal? Kind of went through the similar questions that you ask. And she said, I want to open up the peanut butter jar. And I'm like, what? I'm like, what are you talking about? In my head, still, I'm a young, kid. I'm thinking I want to look good. I want to get stronger. So and so. Sure enough, she loved to wake up in the morning and have an English muffin and peanut butter and watch the news. That was like her favorite part of the morning.
Yeah.
But her hands, she lost so much strength in her hands that she couldn't open up the peanut butter jar anymore. And that just stuck with me so quickly. I was like, wow, like that's a really interesting thing. I never heard that before. And like 3 weeks after training, we were doing deadlifts, we were doing farmer carries, going down. She was pushing a sled. I mean, all the, stuff that is hysterical to see. And like, you see it from, Patrick Mahomes, but now you got a 93-year-old woman doing the same
Yeah.
stuff over here. And 3 weeks into training, I was just at my desk. I was just writing out some programs, just looking down. And all of a sudden I hear something on my desk, and it's Helen. And she grabbed the peanut butter jar and she put it on my desk. And she said, watch this. And she opened up the jar in front of me. And the look of excitement and achievement on her face was there. It's like, I get goosebumps still thinking about this on that. And that just to be able to work with someone who is, as Dan John says, has more yesterdays than tomorrows, in there, to still live active and to enjoy life and to still be able to do things that they love. I'm like, I think that just gave me way more, pride as a coach than all the athletes that I've trained of, lifting of trophies. So
100%. And it's funny you should mention that too, because we were talking just before we hit record. I was doing a podcast with Sean Sewell earlier, and we talked about the same thing. Is that like the most satisfying thing is when you get a client or student, as I like to call them, will tell you, I was able to do this. I was able to roughhouse with my kids or my grandkids, and I didn't hurt. I was able to get up off the ground more easily. It's the stuff that they're able to do in the real world that they're coming to you for anyway. And I think it's very easy as a trainer to think like a fisherman as opposed to a fish. And you have to think about what is actually interesting to them. What is the thing that they actually want to be able to do? And I think there's just no question that if we're talking about their ability to maintain their autonomy, like this gal wanted to just be able to do something that she loved doing every day, which is something we see as very simple, like what's the big deal? But that simple act of autonomy, that simple ability to just do something that you really enjoy doing. It doesn't have to be hoisting a trophy over your head or getting an SFG certificate or whatever. That's really what it's all about. And that's the whole point of strength training, is that like the strong first credo goes, strength has a higher purpose. That's a perfect example of it.
Yeah, it is. And it's, it's just those things. I think you don't realize how powerful autonomy is until you lose some of it.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, that's one of the greatest teachers ever, is when things are lost. And just naturally, I think as humans, we do that. We take for granted the things that we have. That's why, I have clients do gratitude practices, in work, just because it's so easy to look at the things that we have. I do that in my own practice, beforehand. I have a gratitude practice before I get into my own training, just to be able to lift, to be here so I can actually perform these things. And those things sound like on a day by, just like if you just put it as one anecdotal type thing, it seems a little trivial, but you do that as a practice over and over again, you really see things differently. And I'm really fortunate, I feel, that I got to work with the older population, in our culture, because they can teach you a lot about being self-sufficient, because they're fighting for it. Like, it's not like they had all their time when they woke up and they felt great all the time, where now they're really fighting to keep that going as long as possible. And the discipline and the focus that people give in on that is different than, any high level athlete that we see on ESPN or whatever.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the really important takeaway too, just going back to the previous example you gave, is that you had a gal who's 93 years old. Within 3 weeks, she was able to make a noticeable improvement and you'd be able to open up the peanut butter jar. Again, it's not like a Guinness World Record thing, but that's not what people train for anyway.
Mhm.
They train to make their lives better and more enjoyable. And
Yeah.
I think it's very inspiring. I can completely understand where you're coming from, because it's like, I think a lot of times people still have this false idea that, when I've gotten to this certain age, I can't, I can't get stronger anymore. I can't lose weight anymore. It's all downhill from here. And it's just totally bogus. It's
Yeah.
just not the case at all.
And how quickly you are, how short of a time period you are probably from feeling so much better, from doing
Exactly.
it. Me and my old partner Chris, we used to talk about all the time, the thin veil. It's
Yeah.
like, it's a thin veil of getting exactly where you want to be. Like, it's really close. So for a 93-year-old, it was 3 weeks away of doing some work so she could still open up that peanut butter jar. It's like 3 weeks goes by in about 2 freaking seconds.
Yeah. Like, you just don't realize that, especially like, I always said, like, after the age of 30, it seems like everything just starts to like go by a lot more quickly. That's 100% the case. Now, speaking of, we're talking a little bit about the progression of your career and how you've worked to help people. You've since expanded it with a podcast as well. And I'm curious, I got into podcasting because my friend Pat Flynn nudged me repeatedly. When are you going to start your podcast? When are you going to start your podcast? And he actually even technically gave it a name, Hammercast. That was just like the working title.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I would imagine nobody had to nudge you to start your own podcast. What got you into podcasting out of everything? Like, were you a big podcast listener? Or was it something that you just thought that, like, this seems like it'd be a fun project? How did that begin?
Funny. So going back to, I was a podcast listener first, more so because all of a sudden I switched careers. I was at a place for 10 years.
Mhm.
I built a business as a manager, and I just knew that I needed to go in a different direction that I was working with. And all of a sudden I joined a good friend of mine in a studio close to me. He just kind of started a place like 6 months ago, and I was excited to go in and build it. But it was about 30 minutes away from my home at that time. So all of a sudden I was going from living 1 mile away from work to now living 30-minute one way. So I was at least an hour in the car.
Yeah.
And just out of time, I didn't just feel like listening to music and stuff. So I started listening to a lot of Joe Rogan podcasts, actually, because he had somebody who I know you're familiar with too, is Jordan Peterson.
Oh, yeah, I love Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, so I just listened to like the 4-hour one that they just did recently, which is,
How was that?
it was amazing. It was amazing, but it's like they go so deep into stuff, like you have to just give your brain a little bit of a break.
I would bet, yeah.
Yeah, but I started to listen to podcasts. Like, I got into Jordan Peterson's work, and I saw that Joe Rogan had him on, and I would just get deep into these conversations. Then there was some other ones that were just fascinating, and I saw, someone like Rogan, who is interesting because he's very polarizing. It's either like you love him or you hate him and stuff.
Yeah.
It's I think he's just a really interesting person because he's so curious with stuff. So I just would enjoy listening to the podcast, and I started to listen to other podcasts that were going on. And so kind of fast forward into a bit, I was just kind of doing it as an information and inspiration gather for myself.
Sure.
And I always got so much from connecting with people and learning. And fast forward to the whole pandemic that happened, we went from building a gym where I was just in most of the day, just building that up. Things were going in one very deep direction. And then all of a sudden the world changed. Doors were closed. I lived in New York. We were closed down for 9 months. We thought we were going to be closed down for a couple months. We had to close down the gym for that. So during that time, it was all a bunch of different stuff of what we were going to do. We were working with clients. We were trying to figure out not only how to keep our business alive, but also just how to keep our minds occupied.
Yeah.
So me and Chris Abbott, my former partner, we would talk every day in the morning. Like he would call and we would just go over the day, and it would just end up turning into, you know, training conversation. We used to do that all the time. We would train in the studio, and as you trained, we would just chat. You know, you just go over stuff. Hey, check this out. Hey, check this out. And it just became a conversation. And one of our coaches, as we were on a call, kind of saw us going back and forth with banter and was like, you guys should just do a podcast. And we're like, okay, like that sounds kind of cool. So we actually kind of just started a just podcast, just to kind of chit chat, put the time out. And we thought it might actually be a way that we could promote our products on there too. Like we thought it was a way to make money. Well, sure enough, podcasting takes a long time to do a lot of the financial aspects to it. So after doing like, I think we did like 10 or 12 episodes, just kind of talking, you know, with just me and Chris, just going over different stuff, books we were reading, stoicism, things we were interested in, nutrition. And then we're like, well, all right, we really need to figure out this business. So we stopped that in the podcast. And then last year in January, when we changed directions a bunch of different times, one person just messaged on Facebook to us like, hey, are you guys going to do any more podcast episodes? And we're like, you know what, like kind of miss doing this. Like we just miss doing the podcast. But we wanted to do it different. So we started to interview people and we started to connect out with people. And so I got, you know, I worked with Brett Jones. I had him come on as my coach. Chris worked with Tim Almond. We got Tim on. We started to connect with other people that we just knew from kind of our communities and stuff, and started to interview them. And then realized that, holy shit, people are actually listening to this. So we're like, if we're going to do this, we're going to do this every day. And we started recording a new episode every single day. We put out 160 episodes in like 6 months on this podcast.
Impressive.
Yeah. And it was a blast to do, but we talked to people in strength. I talked to people in mindset, talked to people. We talked to sex therapists. We talked to mindset coaches, financial advisors, like a lot of just people in different levels of strength to get into. And what I realized is I loved just connecting with people because I was curious about it. And then, you know, some things changed over and we, you know, kind of split in some stuff, me and Chris. And then I wanted to get really back into the podcast. I'm like, I need to do this, you know, for myself. I talked to some other people about it. And they're like, you know, you were really just seemed just alive, you know, when you were on the podcast doing stuff. So I started the Strength Connection, and that's been going now for like 4 months of just kind of getting back rolling with stuff. And it's one of the highlights of the day. I just absolutely love, you know, connecting with people. And it's just, it's really just one of the true blessings that's come from all this.
Yeah. That's one of the great things about podcasting, is that you do get a chance to reach out to people that you otherwise wouldn't have a conversation, or you wouldn't have an excuse to have a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like, if you know that you're going to say something that people are going to want to listen to, it's like, yeah, sure. Let's talk about it. Let's dive into some interesting topics. And then knowing that there are other people, I think, again, in many ways, it's an extension of like our purpose as personal trainers, is the ability to impart something that you know and that you know will help other people, but in a way that it's going to meet them where they are. You know, like you talked about, you can use the scientific language with your colleagues and stuff like that, but you have to know how to speak simply to other folks.
Exactly.
And I think when you're just having a conversation, everybody can relate to that in some way or another, because everybody has conversations, everybody talks through things, everyone has discussions. And you know, a funny thing too is that people are inherently voyeuristic. People like to listen in on other people's conversations. You know, like
very true.
I'm by the way, that's very much the case for me too. Like it's rarely is it like if, you know, I'm walking in an aisle of a store or whatever, I hear somebody's talking and maybe it sounds a little dramatic. Like, okay, I'm gonna stop here. I have to see how much I can hear. You know, but yeah, on the topic of things that people find inherently fascinating, like strength training, I've never met anybody who is not fascinated with fitness. Even people who aren't necessarily very fit, like they're just fascinated by it.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think, well, and I think with strength too, it's so interesting because everybody has a different definition in their head, you know, of like what strength is. And like what I really found, what started to really fascinate me was about just having conversations with people and kind of having a framework idea of where it's going to go. So you kind of have like out of bounds lines with like what, like if things get off track, this is how we get back on track,
Right.
but kind of letting the conversation roll and go. And what I learned early on was you think a lot of times, oh, you don't want to bother someone, or maybe they're really busy. Like so many people are so giving of time to have a
Yeah.
conversation and chat about these things. Like, people like, like Dan John, when we met, like, I've had Dan on a couple times. He's coming back on my show again. Like he's always willing to chat and to talk, with people about it, like people who are willing to do it. So, and I think having just the curiosity to talk to people about their lives and about
Yeah.
what's going on, and ask questions, because like that's what we're all trying to find out, right? It's like nobody has all the answers. It's like, so to have a conversation with you and just kind of have an idea of what we're going to go about, but we don't know what story is going to come out and what's going to
Sure.
happen. It's like a dance going on, and that's so exciting and energizing. And I think that's one of the things during these last couple years with this whole COVID pandemic, where people have become so isolated, and we stopped having these conversations,
Yeah.
so much. And whether you do it through Zoom or whether you do it in person or whatever it is, just having the conversation is, I think, a piece of strength. That's like the communication side of strength. So it's like, it's not just the physical side. And that's kind of where I saw myself too. It's like, I do the physical side. I know I can always progress on that, but I know it's always going to be kind of little increments going in that. I've done it so long. But the mental side of strength, and learning how to write, learning how to think, learning how to interview people, like that's a different type of strength that helps in so many different ways. And it's that's why it's like so exciting to kind of have something like a podcast to explore.
Absolutely. And the other thing too is, like you said, you never really know where things are going to go. And so it could go in some very interesting directions. And you can start having a conversation about things that, maybe like had been present in the recesses of your mind, but you'd never really gone all that deep into.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden you get great ideas, you get inspiration, and then other people get to hear that as well. And they get to kind of like, they get to get a window into that and get a deeper insight into a lot of different things, whether it's strength or sex therapy, whatever that may get involved. I have a general idea what that might involve, but no, but it is very fascinating. And I think the other thing too is, I think people really are, number one, when it comes to guests, I think people in general, not even just guests, but one of the things that I think leads people to wanting to be guests on podcasts is that people are inherently helpful. They want to be useful to others. Like if they can do something that's going to help somebody else out, they're happy to do that, and I think people lose sight of that, or they forget that. But I think a lot of people are like that. And then I think the other thing is, a lot of people are also inherently curious. People
Mhm.
want to know, like, again, even if you're voyeuristic and you kind of want to hear somebody's conversation at the store or whatever, it's like, it's because you're curious. Like, what are they talking about? What's going on in their life? Like, is this going to be a funny story I'm going to be able to tell somebody later today? Like, I think all of that stuff is something that's just inherent within us, and people, um, I think a lot of people don't think that much about it because they think of, you know, podcasting as being something like, oh, that's for professionals and that's for people who are, whatever. But it's like, it really, when it comes down to it, it's just having a discussion with people and bringing up interesting topics and then letting it percolate in your mind.
Yeah. Well, that's why I love the part of training that I do is working with clients is I
Yeah.
love the initial call. Like I love meeting somebody for the first time or calling them for the first time and just finding out about the person, because the training program is relatively going to be, there's going to be a lot of similarities from one to the other, depending on where you're starting and stuff like that. But like finding out about people's stories, like people, humans are fascinating. Like everybody's got a story. If you've lived 30 years on earth, like you've had a lot of days and you've had a lot of experiences. So to hear how somebody communicates, to hear how they think through a problem, to hear where they go with certain words, you can say strength and there's a certain connotation, there's a certain feeling that they get from that. It's like there, and I just think that's fascinating to talk with people about, and connecting with other people on that is, it's just something that I know is probably the biggest thing that has helped me personally, and it's made me a better coach, it's made me a better friend. I mean, just made me a better son to my parents. I mean, just all the type of stuff that's going on. So it is, I just think that everybody should recognize that communication is so vital of what we do,
Definitely.
not just about sets and reps.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you're going to be coaching anybody, more than anything, I think the sets and reps might change from what you had planned for the day. Like the person
Mhm.
comes in, they're like, I was up all night. My kid was was puking and it's supposed to be a hard day. It's like, okay, maybe we're going to change the sets and reps to make it something that's going to be a little more achievable because they're not well rested and they're stressed out. But the conversation skills are going to stay the same. And you're going to need to be able to have that discussion in order to be able to determine what's right for them and what's not. So the program, I mean, programming is important, but it's later on down the line, like you have to be able to meet the person where they are. And if you can't do that through, through communication skills, it's you're not gonna have a very good time, and neither is your charge that you're trying to train.
Yeah, no, that's going to be an awkward time.
Yes, very much so. Now, where can people find you online? I know you've got the Strength Connection podcast. Is that on all the major podcast networks, or what are they called?
You can go to Apple, Spotify, wherever you find the Strength Connection is the podcast. I put out 2 new episodes a week, mostly with guests, and I also do recaps myself and do solo casts when there's stuff on my mind that I want to just throw out and make you listen to as well. On that, you can find me on Instagram, just at Mike_strength_connection. Just go to Michael Kurkowski on Facebook or Instagram, and you can find me from there. And then you can go to my website, which is mystrengthconnection.com, and that's where you can check out more of my resources. I have free resources out for strength, for mindset, for intuition training. And if you really want to dive deep into it, give me a call. I'd be more than willing to chat with you.
Fantastic. And that's mystrengthconnection.com, correct?
That's it.
And then you can look up Mike Kurkowski. That's Kurkowski.
There it is.
Nice. You'll find this very funny. I thought this was very funny. Maybe you won't find it very funny. But when we originally we talked, I think it was like early last year, we got on a phone call to talk, and I wasn't 100% sure of how to spell your name. So I like to just like write little jokes to myself. And so I wrote Mike Kurkowski, I think. And then, I was putting it in my calendar for our Zoom call for the podcast. And then of course it's got like a suggestion from things that you previously scheduled. So, and I had totally forgotten about it, but it came up as Mike Kurkowski. I'm like, well, I'm just going to have to put it in like that. But I do know how to spell your name just off the top of my head. So, but
appreciate it.
Yes, exactly. This is just.
I'll tell you a hysterical story on this. This is totally off topic, but it just popped to my head. I think it was in middle school. It was like the first day of middle school, and our librarian, he was a guy who was Polish, so he heard my name Kurkowski, and he's like, "Oh, it's Kurkowski." It's like that's how you say it in in the Polish dialect. And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's cool." And everybody's around, and he's like, "And your name's Michael." It's like, "So your first name is Michal, so Michal Kurkowski." So of course, first day in like middle school, now my nickname is Mihol for the next 3 months afterwards. I'm like, thanks, man. Like middle school is not hard enough. Like you just gave me the nickname Mihol. So.
Yeah, and then of course you have no ability to get retribution because you can't go to the library and yell at him. You're gonna end up going to the principal's office. Yeah, you gotta. Yeah. That's one of those things. It's like. Yeah, you got to pull them aside. Like, okay, you tell me all these things about my name and origin later, just in case there's something embarrassing about it. But
I'm sure I'll run into him at some point and be like, "Hey, man, you remember that day?" Because I do.
Yeah. Look up some swear words in Polish. You can really impress them. You're like, I gotta pay you back after all these years.
That'd be great.
Very funny, very funny. Well, okay, once more, mystrengthconnection.com. Mike Kurkowski. What was it? Mike_strength_connection on Instagram. And then, of course, check out Spotify and iTunes and all the other podcasting platforms to listen in on his podcast. And thank you very much for being on the show. I had a great chat.
Dude, it's a pleasure, man. Thank you.
Pleasure was all mine. Folks, thank you very much for listening. And as always, have fun and happy training.